your screen.
So thank you for this invitation. So today I will be talking about the problem of being biodiversity rich and data poor. No? So basically, um, all the things that we're trying to do to collect more data so that all of the management interventions in the Philippines will be guided accordingly. So this is definitely not a one-man project. We've been doing this since 2014. So it's been 8 years. And I have therefore a lot of collaborators, no, from all over the Philippines. So with me are people who are doing coral reefs, seagrass, mangrove, fish, programming, physics, coastal geology, and so on. So this is what we've been doing in the last 8 years. So as most of you know, the Philippines is located in the Coral Triangle. And the Coral Triangle is the most diverse, marine diverse area of the world. This is good because it naturally is resilient to a lot of disturbance, whether that's human induced disturbance or climate related or just natural catastrophe. Because of the great biodiversity, there are enough flora and fauna that belong to almost the same niche, so that when one is overfished, for example, there are alternates that can actually take over the same niche. So it's very resilient. It also translates to, from the point of view of the consumer, mostly the fishermen and the coastal communities, it seems boundless. It seems that it has so much to give that people tend to forget that there is a limit to its capacity. And so this picture shows you, the why we are called the Coral Triangle. Even if just using zooxanthellae corals, you see that the highest number of species found is within this red, right in the middle. And the Philippines is in the northern apex of that. But this is translated, therefore, to almost a negligence. So the government has not been looking at managing this resource because it looks bountiful. And if you take a look at the result of the UNESCO 2017 Global Ocean Science Report, we're not much different from other countries, except maybe for the top 5, Norway, Belgium, Finland, of course, Germany and Australia, who have a lot of marine researchers per million inhabitants. In the Philippines, we only have 5 marine researchers per million population. So that's definitely not enough, especially now with increased stress on the system, both due to population pressure. More food is needed, for example, more mining is being done, more extraction is being done, as well as climate change. We need to be able to better manage these shared resources. And for that, we need data. But there just isn't enough human capacity. So what we need is to be able to feed management interventions with good evidence, with data that is not just taken once in a while, but for a long period of time, repeatedly, so that we know if some management interventions are working, or how does the system respond to, say, a passage of a big storm event and so on. But as you can see, it's not just the coral zooxanthellae that is very high in the Coral Triangle. The number of species of mangroves and the number of species of seagrass is also quite high in this area. So if you only have 5 people per million people to study this vast amount, so in the Philippines, we're talking about 2.6 hectares of corals, 2.7 hectares of seagrass, and now only 0.3 million hectares of mangrove because we've killed off a lot of them, but originally also 3 million hectares of mangrove. We need much, much more people. So the only way we saw on how to augment the lack of manpower is to engage the local communities, the people who really live every single day of their life in front of the ocean. And they're the best to assess and monitor. But then you have to develop methods and tools that they can use, but will give us, will give decision makers as well as themselves the correct data so that you can say something about your system. So this is what I'm going to share today. So our group was able to develop these four methods and tools. So we have the ARAS, which is the Automated Rapid Reef Assessment System. We have the CORVA, which is the Coral Reef Visualization and Assessment. We have the Fish Eye, which is a semi-automated reef fish assessment. And we have the Reef Baby, which is a coral Bayesian belief network, supposedly decision support system, but really it's more of a discussion support system in the Philippine setting. So this exists, and I'll try and summarize this for you today. So ARAS, so when we, if you look at 2.6 million hectares of corals, even if you divide that by the number of available marine scientists, we would be in the water 365 days of the year, and we still can't finish that, okay? So we really need a lot of people to be able to do this. So the usual way to do this, as you are familiar with, is the man-to-tow or the line intercept transect. In both cases, those are very technically laborious systems, because those people will have to know what they're looking at so that they can grade this, so that they can actually summarize what they're seeing. It's also quite expensive because usually, you have to put a lot of money out to be out there, but you can only be there an hour at a time, especially if you're diving, and only maybe 3 times a day can you dive. So that's just 3 hours for a lot of money put out. And so it's a slow process. So the solution we came up with is to come up with a system where it can be diverless, no need for divers. It can be towed by your regular banca, which is our local motorized boat. And it can actually be copied. We give out the design, and people can copy the design of this. And we tried it with the cheapest ruggedized camera available, which at the time was GoPro 3. But if you have better cameras, you can use that too. But at least it also works with the more inexpensive ones. And so we have this. This allowed us to give this away to a lot of communities, and they just drag it along with their small boats, and they get the data. So it comes out like this. So you just have to drop it down. We call it a teardrop. The contraption itself is called a teardrop. It has a camera inside. It's GPS tagged, so we know where we are at any given time. So it's timestamp on the camera. There's timestamp on the GPS on the boat, so you can calibrate that. And then this is what you get. So on, of course, clear water. Most coral reefs only grow in good clear water anyway. So clear water, tow it just on the side of the boat, just making sure that the angle of the sun doesn't put too much shadow on your image. And then at the end of the tow, we can then stitch this up. And you can use a lot of different software to stitch. We developed our own, but you can use readily available, downloadable image stitching. We just developed our own because we noticed that those that are freeware, like ICE, for example, from Microsoft, they tend to change the color at the very end of the sample. So on both right and left, there's a change in color. And if we're going to do additional runs on this image to identify the types of corals that are there, both texture and color is important. So we develop our own. But for the community, they can just stitch this up, just like a regular panorama. And then they have a permanent picture captured of that site, say an marine protected area, for that particular date. And since this is geotag, you can even put it on Google and have that image tagged. And so, for example, this Google image on the left, if you zoom in on each of that, you can have this panorama image. So what it gives you is a labeled panorama with a scale bar So you can also see the size of each, and you can go through your coastal area and have each part geotagged. This is especially interesting for areas that are tourism based, no? Their economy is tourism based, because then they can show the tourists, this is what you can see here, this is what you can see there. And we were able to do, on the average, 33 kilometers per day. So that's a huge improvement to, divers going down and doing 100-meter, 50-meter transects, 3 of those in an hour. So 33 kilometers per day. So I think that's a great improvement. The target beneficiaries for this are the local Department of Environment and Natural Resources, the local higher learning institutes, so universities and colleges, and also the local community themselves. So after we developed this, we were able to try it out in a lot of areas. And every time we do, we communicate with the local community. And if they're willing, they also come out with us. So after several tens of stations, we then rolled it out officially to the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, because they are the ones that are mandated to annually have a report on the state of the coast. But they have not been doing this for years because there's just not enough resources before. So we rolled it out along with a lot of other things, a lot of other capacity building. So we had a big project called CORVA, or Coral Reef Visualization and Assessment. And under these, we had 8 big projects that, actually 9, 9 projects that also took a look at different areas of the Philippines, targeting mostly what we call the National Integrated Marine Protected Areas. So it can be protected areas that are purely marine. It can also be protected areas that also consider the watershed. So we targeted those. There's 33 of those. We targeted 1/3 of that for us to be able to do 1/3. But while doing so, we wanted to capacitate the local Department of Environment to be able to do this as well. Because then after we do the baseline, then they can do an annual monitoring. So out of the 9 projects, I think we only 3 we were not able to download. That's the deep reef exploration, because that at that time entailed people who are able to do mixed gas diving. So they did have that. We weren't able to download connectivity as a capacity building, so we just gave them the results. This is mostly physical oceanographic work of using connections of where larval dispersal will end up. And we weren't at that time able to download the remote sensing part. Again, because at that time they did not have enough resources computer-wise to be able to do this. But all the rest, we had a lot of capacity building, intensive capacity building, lectures, hands-on work, and actual going out with us to do the monitoring and assessment. So we were able to do reef monitoring, reef visual census, mangrove and seagrass assessment, and also coastal stabilities. We decided early on that it was very important in the choice of marine protected area that the adjacent coast is also stable, that it's not eroding, for example, or accreting. Because if it's either of those, the sediments would either end up, if it's accreting, over the seagrass area. If it's eroding, most likely over the coral reef area. So it was important to find out how stable a certain coastal area is, so that going forward, they can recommend if there's 2 choices of areas to protect, one with not stable coast and one with a stable coast, they'll go for the stable coast. So that was the thinking behind that. So we taught them all this. We were supposed to do it for 3 years. The only problem we ran into was that by we were able to do first year, started the second year, but then a lot of the people that we taught the first year who were supposed to go through this all the 3 years, half of them got retrenched somewhere else to do something else like forestry or something else. So we had to go back again to year one with the new recruits. So that's another problem for the Philippines, is because the people that are assigned in the Department of Environment are not permanently there. No? So now we realize we actually have to make manuals so that the next generation will just go through the manuals and they won't need such an intensive training from us. Okay. But the good thing about this is the department also recognized the need for this, and they have what's called it's like a local ordinance within the department. And once you have a certain methodology accepted by all of them, then they put that, it's as if it's the law, internal law. So all the different regions of the Philippines will have to follow the same. So we've been able to put some of these inside those, so that going forward, they are now actually following what we taught them. So we were able to train 80 participants from all over the regions of the Philippines. So we were proud of that. And one thing we learned was it was also good not only to train them, but to make sure they have the right equipment when we left. So we gave them a whole set of ARAS, along with the camera and the GPS. We also gave them a whole set for coastal integrity. No? They have their own diving equipment and so on, so we didn't need to give them those. But these two, we found that it was better to give them these so that going forward they have something to use. So some of them, I'm glad to say, are still using it. Some have already damaged what we gave them, but they want to replenish them and so on and so forth. So on the totality of this project, we were able to go to a lot of areas and actually got baseline data for all of these. No? So coral reef, seagrass, mangrove, fish, and coastal integrity. And then we were able to do remote sensing of the habitats in some of the watershed, and then connectivity of larval dispersal. This is important to us because the last nationwide coral reef assessment similar to this was in the 1970s. So it was almost 35 years after that first one. And that one was not able to do all of these as well, no? Mostly just corals and some fish. So that was a good accomplishment. But when we were rolling out, we noticed that amongst all of these that we were teaching, the hardest for the people to actually uptake is the fish. Because Professor Sonia can attest that there's 2,500 species of coral-related fish in the Philippines. So I still remember the first dive of Sonia here. I saw her eyes pop out like that.
We have photos of that, yes.
Yes, we have photos of that because it's so much more than the Caribbean, for example. So we thought, how can we teach them? So we went two-pronged. One is to just teach them target species or indicator species. That way, they can say something about either the reef health or the productivity of the area in terms of fisheries. And at the same time, make some sort of automated identification of fish. Okay. So that's what's next, no? Fish eye. So fish census usually, it takes an expert to swim through, say, 30 meters to 50 meters of transect and note down all the fish that they see. Note down the species, note down the size, because you want to do something about biomass, note down the number. And I have to admit, there's only a handful of those in the Philippines, of that level. I can trust, I mean, with my life, maybe 10 of them. Maybe if I push it a little, maybe 2 dozen that can do this. It's still definitely not enough. No? So there's a need for very high level expertise to do this. And then we've done tests on experts that will swim and report to each other what they saw. And the common fish, of course, it's easy, but the not so common ones, sometimes they give different answers. And of course, you only have limited time underwater, an hour of dive, for example. And we do know that fish swim away whenever there's divers around. So what we wanted was something that we can just put down, swim away from, come back to, move again, swim away from, so to allow the fish to be able to come back without the presence of divers or snorkelers. So with that, we invented Fish Eye. You can use this with just a couple of cameras. Again, because we wanted this to be a easy to manufacture, we went for GoPro. At that time, it was already GoPro 4, I think. And now we're using GoPro 5. And you can just use this with a couple because we need that for a stereo so that we can actually say something about the size of the fish. But if you want, you can use 4 pairs. So there's 8 cameras total. So you have a 360 look. But for the typical survey, you just go forward anyway. So you just need to. And any diver can do this. They don't have to know fish. They just have to follow the line and put it down every 5 meters, go away for 10 minutes, come back, make it go forward again. You don't even need divers actually, because you usually do this only in about 5 meters water. So you can have a snorkeler, just put it every 5 meters on your transect. And then the data is then emailed to us, or usually they send an SD card because the data is quite big to upload through the Philippine bandwidth. So they send us an SD card and we put it in our servers, and comes out your fish species, your fish count, your fish size, your biomass, and your population density. So it looks like this software. So it's viewing your video. It's already tagging what species there is, how many. And we've said, okay, indicator species are those that indicate reef health. So it also recognizes that and counts that. And also, if you have target species for economic use, it also counts that. So if you look at the top, there's species count while watching the video, and the number of indicator species and the number of target species. And then at the end, you have a summary of how many individuals per square meter. So this is saying almost 1.979 individuals per square meter with a max N of 19. So it's able to do this. So we're able to analyze a lot of data in just a few, in just a few days. We churn out the data and give them back to the community. And we can give them graphs on biomass count, even sizes, and they can use it either just as a baseline assessment or actually a measure of how efficient is their management intervention. So they can have a before and after, or what does it look like now, and then how does it fare every so many months until they see if there's changes in the biomass, for example, or in the count through their because of the intervention. You can also use it for environmental impact assessment. If there are industries that want to go to your area, they can do the measurement first, and then when they say they're making a port or they're making a factory nearby or a coal-fired power plant, then you can also measure how much that is affecting your system during construction, after construction, when it's already running, and so on. And then there's a third-party audit because there's a lot of investments also in the marine environment. There are a lot of NGOs and patrons that put money into safeguarding certain places in the Philippines. And you'd want a, right now the assessment is self-assessment, no? The implementers are telling the patrons, okay, it's improving and so on. They take pictures and so on. But it's really not audited. It's not counted. So this way they can have that audit. If they go back to the same place, they can actually give numbers of how much it's improved. And there's a lot of other uses for it. So with all of these, the next question that the community asked was, so what can we do to improve? What are the management interventions? And most of the time, we're copycats, no? And the Filipinos are. So if it works somewhere else, it might work here. So we just implement it. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it's a very costly mistake because it doesn't translate. No? So what we tried to do was to have a discussion support system, meaning a model that they can run where they can put their interventions and see if it really matters in their system. Okay. So how did we do this? So we basically just named 3 things that they might be interested in seeing. How much coral cover there is, you know, both as an ecological importance, but also tourism importance. A phase shift if it's riddled with macroalgae, turf algae, or if it remains mostly coral. And then how much fish is there, because these are fishing villages, right? So these are the target product of the model, where it will go, you know, where it's most likely located. And of course, the logic behind this is because we do know, you know, the more complex your coral cover is, the better it is, the more fish you have. If you have herbivores that will protect your corals, then less likely will you have shift in phase. Okay. So, but we don't do, we lecture that to them, but we don't dwell on it for as long as they understand that there are probabilities of trajectories that can happen. And then we put that all in the model, and what we use for the model are literature on coral reefs from the 1970s to 2010, and concentrated a lot on the coral triangle publications and see if people have experimented or observed changes due to whatever, any of the drivers. You know? And we then use Bayesian Belief Network as a background for the model that we then made. But again, we did not show that modeling to the communities anymore. We just show them what are their options and then how to press buttons to see what will happen. So the options are looking at the drivers that they can actually make use of. So the drivers are what we all know as scientists, which is, you know, anything from the ridge can affect the reef, so the upland use. If you have mariculture in the area, you're putting in a lot more nutrients, so that will also impact your coastal habitat health. If you have coastal development like reclamation or solid ports, that can also affect the sedimentation flow and therefore affect the reef health. Then the more in-water ones, which is destructive fishing, tons of fishers in a single area, you know, very dense fishing, and also gleaning can also affect your community, your coral reefs. So these are the 6 that they can turn on and off and see what will work in their area. So first we have a focus group discussion. We ask them to tell us about everything about their community. So this is just one example. So they said that their coastal area has mangrove, seagrass, and coral reefs. So and the coral reefs are huge, so that's good. And then that the village is mostly agricultural and they don't have big ports, they don't have reclamation. The ports they have are just wooden and on stilts. They have fishing activities, a lot of them because they're mostly fishers, and that the women also gather gleaning to sell, not just to consume. And Unfortunately, even though it's banned in their area, dynamite fishing is banned in their area, they still hear dynamite fishing ongoing. So they think those are non-residents, coming from different communities. And then finally, they said that they have a lot of mariculture cages due to the big companies that came in and put mariculture in their area. Okay, so there are buttons to push that. So first, there's a description of the area. Mangroves are present. So if you take a look at the left side, mangroves are present, seaweed, seagrass are present. They have big coral reefs. And then I clicked all of the agriculture, some destructive fishing, fishing density medium, and there's gleaning. Okay, and then there's mariculture, but there's low coastal development. Those are what is there. And then we run it. So you click the calculate, and it'll give you probabilities. So the phase shift is their problem. The phase shift probability is that it's at the verge of going more covered with turf. Okay, so we asked them, they read through the manual, and we asked them, so what intervention do you want to use? So of course they want to either get rid of the non-residential fishers doing dynamite fishing, because that's external, and the big companies, because that's also external. Though we don't get anything from those are just mariculture cages that were placed here. So I said, okay, pick one. So they did. They picked mariculture. So took it down a notch. So made it didn't get rid completely of them, but made it very, very far in between. No, so much less. And what turns out is, even with that just one decision, if you push calculate, you'll get a phase shift of a no, higher percentage of most likely it will not. And we know as scientists that that's because we're talking about nutrients, extra nutrients going into the water that will actually feed the turf as a fertilizer and make that more prevalent. But from their point of view, it's just that this one action can make a difference. So things like this, at least they can play around with different options and see where they will lead to. So, but like I said, these are not hard numbers. These are more so that they can actually discuss it within the community on possible options and possible consequences to them. So in general, I think what we really need, not just in the Philippines, not just in the Coral Triangle, but all over, is a democratization of data collection. We have to teach the residents of the coastal areas on how to actually collect data and make something out of them, analyze them. So first and foremost, the tools and methods that we've developed multiplied us, the 5 per million to much more than that. And then for the community, there's a sense of data ownership because they were the ones who collected, not somebody coming in from the big city or coming in from the university and getting the data. At least now they collect the data, and if they need help in interpreting it, that we can help with, but they collected the data themselves. And then on the ground, once they know how to evaluate what a change means, then they can also say, okay, if we get rid of most of the mariculture, will we really see that there's less turf? Will we really see more of the coral reefs coming back, and so on? So the decision making is evidence-based. But we didn't stop there. We can't stop there because that's just that level of tools is more for the the Department of Environment, for example, or the academe. We still need to go all the way down to something that it's more accessible to the communities. I think some of these are initially too much for them. So we keep going. So ARAS, for example, has transformed from what I gave you at the start, the first generation, which had a problem with pitch, and now you have a more stable one, the 2.0. And the next generations, we develop a more torpedo-like assessment tool that doesn't roll. So that's more stable. So that's the development there. For Corva, there's a new project called Hingaku, which we started in 2021, and we'll keep going until early next year, which is now targeting the academe, the local academe, and the coastal community. So we're trying to put this more in a language that they can understand and at observations that are more meaningful to them. So it's not watering down the science at all, but instead of measuring, for example, the amount of sediment lost by looking at the slope from the high tide to the 1 meter and seeing the deficit of sediment there. Instead of doing that, we make them do a beach walk to look at all the escarpments that have happened. If there are roots that are now exposed that used to be underground, of course, if there are houses that are already eroding along with the sand. So it's more intuitive, but it's giving the same data. A certain site is eroding. That's the bottom line, for example. So we're doing this. So we're also doing teaching at the same time, developing manuals. And it hasn't been easy. What we thought would be, we've rolled out the first manual, and some of it was easily taken by the committee, but some of them are still at a level that are not intuitive. So we're going to do another one and rolling that out next month. Fish Eye is developing black boxes on specific sites. What do I mean by this? Right now, they have to gather the data, email the data to us, and then we put it in the server and analyze that. No? But we think we will be able to, for certain sites where we already have enough data that the artificial intelligence is already correctly identifying all of the fish, there's no need for interventions, then we can already give them black boxes, certain communities black boxes, where once they get it, they put it in the black box, out from the monitor, you'll see already the fish ID and the fish count. We can't do biomass. It takes too much computer power for, it really needs a server to do that. But for at least ID and count, I think we can be able to do it soon. Or we're already going to do some prototypes of that. And I think the community is more interested in that because it's all theirs. They don't need to send the data to us anymore. If all they need is a count anyway and identification. And then the Reef Baby 2.0, like I said, the papers that were used to make that patient belief network model is from 1970s to 2010. So since then, a lot more studies have come out. So for more than a decade of papers. So we want to incorporate the new results to Reef Baby again. So there'll be a Reef Baby 2.0, hopefully in 2 years' time. So taking into consideration all the new results, all the new scientific papers. And then finally, we wanted sustainability. We wanted behavioral change all the way to the youth. So it's not easy to make them experience all of this, especially if they're from the city. And we have to accept a lot of the decision makers usually are the city dwellers, who eventually end up being the politicians and so on. So we wanted something that will allow them to emotionally experience what is happening at the coast. So we developed this tabletop game. It's called Resilience, Survive, and Thrive. And it basically teaches the users on how to balance development and resource management. And it can be quite engaging, addictive, and transformational. And we've tried this from 8 years old to 80 years old, and we get basically the same results. They realize that they've been taken for granted the marine environment all their lives, and that they have to do something about it. So if you want to see more of that, the tutorials available on YouTube. So just search Resilience Game Survive and Thrive, either on YouTube or Facebook, and you'll get more of that on how it's done and how it's used. It's now gone commercial, so at least in the Philippines. So hopefully it will reach more people. That's it. That's my sharing for today. Thank you.
Thank you.